Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Your Morning Coffee podcast, a conversation with Keith Jopling. Now, if you don't know him, Keith is a longtime music industry strategist. He's a podcaster and author of a really cool forthcoming new book, Body of Work: How the Album Outplayed the Algorithm and Survived Playlist Culture. That book is coming out on February 10th, and man, it's a good one.
We often read that the music industry today is a track-based economy, but after reading Keith's book, I'm not convinced that's entirely accurate. Keith and I sit down to discuss consumer behavior, artist intent, release strategy, and how the album continues to flourish. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Keith Jopling. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air, on the air, on the air, on the air, on the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Keith, it's good to see you. How are you?
I'm really well, Jay. I'm glad to be here. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I really enjoyed your book, and I rarely read a book twice, but I think I'm going to read this one again. There's a lot in this book, and I want to kick off this conversation with something, because I often read that the music business is a track-based economy, but after reading your book, I'm not convinced that's entirely true. What do you think?
No, it's a mysterious thing to me, which is why I ended up writing this book. And, the way it happened was I was enjoying albums more than I had for many years. And, I do the Art of Longevity podcast, so I meet all these artists that have survived the music business and still going.
Yes.
And they just seemed to me to be making better albums than they had for years. And so I was curious about that. So I started writing something about that. And that's what turned into the book. It is a mystery, like by all forms of logic or analysis or data, the stuff that you and I are used to. That's how we run our businesses and how the music business runs. Albums shouldn't be here. They just should not exist. Yet they do. So I wanted to, they do, and they're better. They seem to be better to me in quality than they ever have been, or as good as. So I needed to explore that a little more, which is how the book unfolded.
Yeah, I love the Art of Longevity. It's so good, and it really reinforces something that I've always known, and that is some of my favorite artists are putting out some of their best work later in their career. But as you know, when you go see one of those heritage artists live or someone who's been around for a while, people don't want to hear new music. They want to hear the things they listened to in high school or college. They want the hits. And when those bands play something new, sometimes they go get a drink or something to eat. And I really think that's a crime, because some of these artists are writing and recording these great albums, not necessarily individual tracks, but really great albums.
You know what? This is one of those occupational hazards for artists who stick around and have careers. They're constantly being forced to look back at a time in which they had a previous peak, and much of that time it may well have been a classic album. And I think part of the problem is that, as I explore in the book, you know, one of the issues is we don't know what a classic album is anymore. And albums come and go too quickly. They kind of evaporate. It doesn't matter how good they are. And that's partly because there's just too much stuff. Um, what I have heard in recent years from artists, and I believe them, like, because an artist will always want to focus on the new project and tell you it's the best thing they've done for a while or ever done. And, they, even if they believe it, sometimes we don't believe it. But in recent times with Art of Longevity interviews, I've talked about this problem. When playing live, tell me about how this new stuff is going down, on the record or off the record. And they tell me the new stuff is going down better than ever, or better than they expected. And from the gigs I've been to, I kind of agree, and I believe them. And so that is another a shred of evidence, if you like, that albums are still resonating, and that the audiences are still enjoying the new stuff if it's good.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is Tears for Fears, Tipping Point. They were playing 7, 8, 9 tracks from that album in their live shows. And I saw that live show, and things didn't slow down. People were singing along. It was a joyous thing. And I would say that that album is as good as anything they did in the 80s.
Yeah. They'd love to hear that. That's a good example. I mean, other British bands from the 90s like Suede, Manic Street Preachers come into that category. A lot of US bands. I mean, one of the interviews I did last year was with Matthew from Native Surf. An indie band you'll know well, have been going for 25 years, on album number 8 or 9. I couldn't remember. Maybe it's even 10. And what really ignited that conversation was just how good Moon Mirror, their album from last year, just how good that record was, and how consistent from start to finish. Same thing, they played a lot of the new tracks live when I saw them, and the audience were getting into the new tracks just as much, singing along. It's just a wonderful thing. But back to your original question, I think what happened, I love history. You have a kind of an alternative fantasy job. One of my many ones is history teacher, history professor. So I love history and what it teaches us. And so going back through the history of certainly the last 25 years in music, and looking at the formats, you kind of learn that some formats, some constraints that are placed around art are built to last forever. And this is the concept in the book of art. Art can buck the market. If there's one thing that needs to buck the market with how influential and dominating tech trends are these days, and I'm sure we'll talk about AI at some point in this conversation, because it's dominating everything right now. Some of those, the constraints that we put around the art from 100 years ago, and with the album, it's 70, 80 years ago, the novel, the 90-minute, 2-hour cinema film, the album, they're built to last. Everything can change around it and scales differently and multiplies differently, but what we're talking about is spending quality time, and time is the one thing. It's just, you cannot, it never changes. So how we choose to spend our time relates to the survival of those formats. But the industry strangely bifurcated, because I think the marketing focused on something entirely different. The release strategies, the marketing, the obsession with with reach, made the song the focus of all of the activity. The song or the clip or the artist personality, has just become more and more important in the marketing. But the value chain of the industry, the product stayed the same. And in fact, that was a real head spin for record labels. And there still is. There's still conversations every day in record labels. What are we going to do with this album? How are we going to market the album? Does it mean anything to us to manage an album project? Because day to day, we're just trying to get the song heard on TikTok. We're trying to get viral videos there. We're still trying to get the song on a playlist. We're trying to get a sync here. That's all song based. Everything is song or clip based still in terms of marketing. So it's a weird kind of bifurcation.
One of the things I thought was really interesting is we talk about the track, but now, as you just mentioned, it's the clip. It can be a short clip of that song. And I've seen this live, and I'm sure you have too, where you go see a band live and they're playing a song, and then sort of in the middle of the song, there's a portion of the song that the crowd really reacts to, and then it's over. And it's a head scratcher at first, and then you're like, oh, that's from that short form video. And they only know that clip. Talk a little bit about sort of that evolution from the track to now a portion of the track.
It's funny that the way you say that, because it's so important in the consumption and the way that the message is received to the audience. Because often I think about, well, it's down to route one marketing. What's the quickest and simplest way to getting reach for this project? And as I talk about in the book, for a long time it was, in the history of music, it was getting a song onto radio, as we know, and then playlists took over, and playlists became the obsession. Really was a music industry marketer's obsession. How do we get on a playlist, make sure the track doesn't get skipped, doesn't get taken off the playlist? How do we get on New Music Friday, because that's success or failure for this new release? Absolute route one obsession. And then something really strange happened during the pandemic. And the pandemic's got something to do with this, but it's kind of mysterious. With the album altogether, it's kind of mysterious. Let's come back to that in a minute. But what did happen during the pandemic was kind of peak time for TikTok. TikTok really took off. Viral videos, clips, sounds, user interpretations of, and suddenly when we came out of the pandemic, it felt a little bit like Spotify had kind of taken a nap and hadn't been able to keep up with this new trend. And the new trend became route one, and budgets just flowed from playlisting into just trying to fund the route towards a viral clip. But I think what did matter more than that was, the key moments, whether it's a lyric, whether it's a kind of chorus hook, it's always been there. It's always been there for bands and songs. I talked to Ricky Ross at Deacon Blue about this. They have a kind of equivalent of a Scottish folk song called Dignity. It's a huge song here in the UK. It'll be known in the US as well to their fans. There's a line in that song. The guy saved up to buy his boat, and there's a question, how did you buy it? And he says, I saved my money. The crowd began to sing that one line. And, Ricky Ross couldn't get it out. He didn't need to get it out. That happened before TikTok. And it's one of these things where tech does amplify behavior that's already been there. Just like communities they've always been there, but suddenly this tech is here that enables people to see it, scale it quicker, share it, and it becomes huge. So I think that's just been I think that's been a cool thing. And I actually think that bands kind of enjoy it when they have those moments live.
Yeah, and hopefully that will grab someone to get curious to dig a little bit deeper and listen to more on streaming services or go see them live. One of the things I thought was really fascinating was you talked about Spotify and this playlist culture and what it's done to albums. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it sort of twisted things up a little bit for a while. Um, and a lot of this is written about already. It's in Liz Pelly's book. It's been written about for a long time how Spotify changed the composition of the song. Became songwriting camps to have these precision tool tracks that like Spotify core, very much ear candy. Very easy to listen to. You don't skip it. You don't pay too much attention to it. It just makes you feel happy. And we had much more of those, obviously. And they were put together so you could have whole playlists of ear candy. And that changes. I mean, there's been so much written about the neuroscience around this. My book isn't neuroscience, but it's pretty obvious that changes your behavior in terms of listening. Your attention span is concentrated. You have less. You have less patience. You're kind of put off by big changes in tempo and mood. Because you want stuff that sort of it just keeps you feeling the same nice, consistent mood as you're working away or at the gym or whatever a playlist does. And albums are entirely different. So there was a focus on let's just get the singles right. And then bands started putting so many tracks on albums just because if you happen to catch someone with your new release, just keep them engaged. This word engagement, kind of a nonsense, because really engagement means that you're fully immersed in something and enjoying it. It's not just time, it's quality time. I think that's the difference. And so albums just, I don't know, they survived through a bumpy ride. And I do put a lot of credit onto Taylor Swift for Folklore and Evermore, again, during the pandemic. Albums with a strong narrative, albums that were different. They created a mood. They kind of introduced her audience to this idea of the cohesive listen. And they were marketed very much as one single project, a cohesive project. And I think that's had much more influence, or we'll come to see what an influence that's had, and particularly on female pop artists who drove a lot of the trend coming back. And I talk in the book about Billie Eilish, about Karol G, all of these amazing sort of big female pop artists, Olivia Rodrigo, that were album focused. And it continued through to last year. I was looking at last year. Of course, we had albums like Lux by Rosalia, very experimental, an album in 4 movements, kind of classical pop. You need attention span to focus on something like that. But even Addison Rae, previous TikToker, great album, nice kind of consistent mood, taking influences from the Madonna Ray of Light years, very, very high quality throughout. And I think her fans have kind of recognized that. Lily Allen, West End Girl, one of the more interesting albums from a UK artist, was the whole narrative about her breakup. But again, and fantastically varied musically, but with a consistent story. So, it's continued again. It's driven a lot by female artists, female pop artists, doubling down on this format that's special to them and making that special to their fans.
So what role has vinyl played in the album's revival? Because a lot of the things that you're speaking about were big vinyl releases.
Yeah. Vinyl's, I think it's factor number 2. So if I was to put this down to factors, and again, in the book, I tell more of a story. It's like an unraveling of a mystery more than anything else. Because what interests me about this topic is you can't really explain a lot of it. But artists are number 1. Vinyl is number 2. The vinyl resurgence. And the way the industry has supported and stepped into that, the vinyl resurgence. And this is everything from, vinyl going from, a cult, a niche, and then going a little bit more mainstream into a format that had enough critical mass that younger buyers became interested in it. Parents passing on their turntables. So much cultural impact of Netflix shows. When a Netflix show has someone putting on a record, it's never a CD being put into a CD tray. Why would it be? I mean, I think in future years we might see cassette come into play, but it's always vinyl. So it kind of first held a mystery, and then I think it's becoming more and more accessible to people under the age of 35, people under the age of 25. That's been really, really important.
Yeah, and I've noticed that on Record Store Day, those crowds are younger and younger. I've been going to Record Store Day for many years, and each year I notice that the people waiting in line, in the queue,
exactly,
they're younger and younger every year.
They might be going in to get a new release, but also going in to get something really vintage. And I talk in the book about these 2 young men that were in the queue in front of me on Record Store Day here in the UK, talking about what they were going to get. And they got the Low End Theory, the reissue of the Low End Theory. I think, was it the 40th anniversary? Maybe it was the 30th anniversary. I know it retailed at 40 quid. So it wasn't cheap. Those guys came out with that tucked under their arm. But the other funny thing about it was I heard them having this conversation about, what albums they were going to get. And then one of them said to the other one, "When are you going to get a turntable?" Just love that. And Illuminate, it tells us,
Sure.
50% of vinyl buyers have a turntable. But it's an aspiration, it's an aspiration for young buyers to, buying into the culture, the tangibility. It's our luxury product.
Yeah.
Vinyl is the record industry's affordable luxury.
Yeah.
And we've got to lean into that.
And I think for some people it's consumption, but a lot of folks, it's fandom. I'm a bigger Neil Finn fan than you are because I've got the signed vinyl back here. It's sort of bragging rights for some of them. Let's talk about the health of the album. In the book, you talk about how, charts and singles bias obscure the picture, and what sort of metrics best capture an album's impact today, do you think?
The metric that's on my mind right now is the one that hasn't been for a long time, and that's Spotify Wrapped. And I take it apart in the book. Spotify Wrapped is obsessed with our time in the usual way. How are we spending our time? How many podcasts? How long did you listen to music? How many minutes? From how many countries? Blah, blah, blah. It's sort of fairly interesting stuff up to a point. This year, how long has rap been going? 10 plus years, right? This year was the first year that Spotify Wrapped included your album listing, your top 5 albums. So they know, of course, Spotify knows. that to me is validation for timing of the book and where the album is, and I celebrate it. I hats off to Spotify. Good, you finally acknowledged that this format exists and is important, and that we're listening to it. Because up to this point, there haven't been a lot of metrics, and there never have been any metrics around album listening. I mean, in the streaming era, the official reporting is 30 seconds of a track. Um, Even the record labels don't know how many people listen to their albums, how many times. They don't get that data. They could. Maybe they ought to start insisting and requesting it, because Spotify does know it. Of course, we have vinyl sales. We know who's bought CD sales. We know who's bought albums. Then we don't know how they're listening, right?
Yeah, and I would only add to that, Keith, that we don't track used vinyl. And if you talk to vinyl experts, they'll tell you anywhere between 80 and 90% of the vinyl that's purchased is used vinyl, because it's less expensive. People can take the chance on something. I would love to see Luminate track used vinyl.
Yeah, me too. It's because it's a valuable part of the business. It's a valid part of consumption. So I agree, but I don't know what we're going to do about it. I really don't, unless Spotify is willing to share more, and also that it is significant, because I don't know if it is. It's probably still pretty niche in the scheme of things. It's pretty niche. If you are an album listener, you probably are doing much of that outside of the streaming realm on those other formats, so we can never measure that. And to some extent, like, there's a frustration in my book in that I can't get to grips with that. But then there's also an acceptance that, perhaps it doesn't really matter. I mean, we don't know who's watching what on Netflix either. Netflix doesn't tell anybody about that. But it doesn't seem to matter. It still has this huge cultural impact, huge spikes in the impact of, certain shows that have a water cooler, word of mouth quality to them. And we still get occasionally albums that do that. I mean, Brat, Charlie XCX's Brat was an album that did that. I'd like to see more of those, the kind of records that you queue around the block for, that are real events, cultural events. I think it's only a matter of time before that's going to make a comeback. But yeah, we haven't seen that for a long time.
Do you think there are certain genres or moods that are more album oriented? Because there are certain things, just like off the top of my head, you think of like Pet Sounds or Sgt. Pepper or something like that is a body of work. And you even mentioned Taylor Swift. And I think for a newer artist, she's done that, where her albums are a body of work that you feel like you need to listen to in the order in which she chose them to be. It's maybe not as important as it was in the 70s, when you had to have that last song on side one be a certain type of song to get people to flip it over and listen to the second side. But what do you think? Are there certain, types of music that are really more album oriented?
I think the miracle of the format is the answer's not really, right? I mean, we have classic albums in rock, jazz. I mean, I just mentioned earlier, those big albums of 2025. I mean, Lady Gaga's Mayhem was high on the chart for a lot of critics and a lot of fans. It took a while for them to recognize it, but to realize how good that record is. It's pop, of course. So I think it's agnostic of the genre. It's all about how the artist wants to use the format. And, the Lily Allen example is a good one because, who would have thought she's the least likely candidate to have like a cultural moment with an album, you would have thought, until West End Girl came out. And the scheduling, I suspect, it's another thing I can't prove statistically. At some point, we got to get a statistic whiz like, Daniel Paris, Stat Significant, one of those guys to really look at albums. Just take whatever you can. Just go hunting to try and give us a little bit more of a dimension statistically on this, even just for fun. But I suspect that the scheduling is even more important now than it's ever been to get people to pay attention. And again, with the Lily Allen record, I think that's where that start to finish narrative and the way those tracks are one followed the other, and just it draws you in, And I think it's become, it always has been a big consideration for artists putting an album project together. Let's not forget, albums take a year, 2 years, maybe 4 or 5. You're whittling down 100 song ideas, maybe 50 songs. You're choosing your final 10 to 12. You're then thinking about the vinyl release, so what's on side 1 and side 2. Then you're thinking about the scheduling. And it's very, very important. Yeah, there's an album by Wolf. Do you like Wolf Alice?
I'm not familiar, no.
Wolf Alice, I've not crossed the Atlantic yet. I mean, they're one of our best rock bands. And by the way, rock is back. This is good news for us, Jay. Rock is very back. Their album, The Clearing, it's a really special example of a modern band looking back to the classic days of the 70s, the way the project is put together, the cover art, the sleeve notes, and the scheduling. And I just think that maybe that album could have landed even better and bigger with a tweak to the scheduling. Who's to say? I don't know. But it's an example that I'm just using because I think the scheduling is more important than ever if you want to convince people to take 20 minutes to listen to a side or 40 minutes to listen to your project, because there's more distractions than there've ever been, as we know.
Right.
You're having to convince someone that you're going to take them on a journey.
Yeah. It's a whole different experience. Talk a little bit about AI and how it relates, because today it's a hot topic. People are using it to create music. They're using it to assist real songwriting, making demos, getting sounds, drawing off someone else's work. Talk about what you learned about how AI sort of affects this whole ecosystem.
I hope it doesn't. And I can see, already we have AI tracks on playlists. If you're listening to a playlist and it's a pretty lean back experience, you maybe even don't notice. Maybe the track is good enough. Maybe it's one of the better tracks on the playlist. Who knows? We have AI tracks hitting the charts. Again, maybe that's okay. A lot of artists would say it's not. A lot of artists would say it is. It's fine. I don't mind competing with that. My take on the album is that AI albums probably will never work. I think they'll just be a little too boring, a little too shallow. I don't think they're going to give those surprises. I don't think you could ever make Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. You're never going to get an AI equivalent of that, a philosophy lesson in an album. Come on. So I think, to me, the album is like a defense against the dark arts.
Do you feel optimistic about the album as a piece of art for the next few years. Obviously, we're in a short form video world, we're in a streaming world. But I feel like there's this resurgence that I have more conversations with people about albums and less about tracks. Not to say that tracks or individual focus tracks are going to go away, but are you feeling pretty good about the way things are trending?
Very good. Very good. 100% confident it will always be here. And that's the thing about the history lesson. Because going back and also not just looking back and researching it, like being there, I joined IFPI, the global version of the RIAA in the year 2000, when everything turned to shit. Napster hit, came along, atomized albums into 100 million individual song files. That was the first ending for the album, the first death knell. Then along came iTunes. Really weird when you look at it in terms of the historical, the historical picture. Because Steve Jobs came along and went, okay, to tackle piracy, you got to sell your songs one by one. Come on, guys. 79p, 99 cents a song. Drew a gasp of breath when he released iTunes in London in 2004. I was there amongst the press corps. They couldn't believe it. What, you're going to sell songs on their own so cheap? Artists started making singles only. We had all of these kind of episodic singles. I'm going to make a single a week, a single a month. I hated the album, all of that. Still didn't crush the album. And that was done with the industry's blessing. Then along comes streaming, playlists. Spotify at some point set the album playback button to shuffle. Nobody knows when. Nobody knows who did it, who was responsible, why they did it. Curious kind of part of music's history, this. A little bit overlooked, I think, because Adele stepped in and said, no, I'm not having this. My album is, I think, a lot about the way I put these songs together. That's my work of art. Can we just have this back? And now we have TikTok and clips, and now we have AI. The album is still here through all of that. Come on. Of course. I do have this scenario in my head. Again, it's back to just being in a record shop. A lady was in a record shop asking for a jazz record. We had all of these amazing new releases in jazz right there in front of her, but she ended up getting a copy of Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. And I was thinking, are we going to be here in 50 years' time and having people walk into a shop and buy a copy of Kind of Blue by Miles Davis? Yeah, of course we are. It's timeless. That's the whole point. It lives forever.
I agree. One of the things I learned, I was at Universal for 18 years, and what I saw every year was that John Coltrane, Love Supreme, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, whatever it is, every year young people would discover that, and it was new to them. And that gives me a lot of optimism about what you're talking about.
Yeah. Me too. And again, curious this, because if you think about the growth in value and the enormous trade in song catalogs in recent years that we know all about, Hypnosis, which used to be an album design agency. And, Merck took his name because he liked the agency. He took the name Hypnosis for his music fund, his song fund.
Yeah.
All of that is driven by the song economy. That is investors going, right, we got to get our hands on these songs. And strangely, I think, this is how confident I am about albums. In those catalogs, they will have bought, of course, acquired whole albums as well. But really, they were just after the big songs. But I think what we're going to see moving forward from here, we could already see this with anniversary tours. And even young bands are using anniversaries of the album 1, album 2, second anniversary comes around, if the album was caught on with their fan base, let's celebrate, let's play it. I think we're going to see enormous value in the album as an acquired right, and what you can do with that album. And Wish You Were Here is a good example. I think it was the 50th this year. 50th, 60th, 100th. I mean, these are going to be big celebrations.
I agree.
For albums.
Yep, I agree. Well, as we wind down here, where can people get your book? Where can they listen to Song Sommelier? Talk about the things that you're doing and where people can access them.
Yeah. And thank you for what you said about the book. Yeah, I mean, I'm pleased with the way it came out. I'm really, really delighted with some of the initial response from the people who have read it, but it's not out yet. It's out on the 10th of February. But also the fact that, it's through a small publisher. It's like being signed to an indie label, a small indie label, but they have distribution. So I'm really pleased that record stores are going to stock it. Certainly here in the UK, so it'll be in Rough Trade, it will be in HMV, it'll be in some of the independent stores, but it's going to be in Barnes and Noble and all of the big stores. You can go in and order it. So I mean, let's just walk the talk here. I think if we're talking about the album and art bucking the market, I'd love for people to read it in its physical form. So, I mean, the easiest thing to do is order it from your local bookstore. But if you want, you can buy the digital version on Amazon as well. That's fine. It's like, however you want to consume it.
That's right.
That's what artists would tell you. However you want to consume my songs, I don't mind, so long as you do.
I think you should do an audio version as well. I've really gotten into audiobooks when I go for a walk or I'm on an airplane, and it's not everyone can listen to a book and retain it and enjoy it, but it's also typically the author who's reading it, and you get little pieces of humor and things that you might not get in print. But also, I'm such a big fan of Song Sommelier. Talk a little bit about that too, because folks should check that out.
Well, of course, there's a certain irony in me going back to writing a book about the album and really, immersing myself in vinyl culture, because the Song Sommelier is a playlist website, and I immersed myself in playlist culture for a few years, and I loved it. But I missed the album too much. I mean, on the Song Sommelier now, the focus will be really on the Art of Longevity podcast. And I'm working with Bang & Olufsen, Danish luxury audio brand, to do more live shows in 2026. And we already have some pretty good names, in the pipeline to sit down and do live shows and then get those out as podcast recordings, maybe with some video. I mean, here's the thing, right? So, tech comes along and they take a format and they impose their power and will on this. So this is what's happened in podcasting, right? It's essentially an audio, countercultural audio format that we now have to, we all have to sit there and have our headphones on and be on video. I was never comfortable with that, but I don't mind if it's live.
Yeah.
And if it's nicely filmed as a live thing. So that's going to be a big focus for me this year, as well as writing more books. So I do have the new book coming out in May after this one, is Riding the Roller Coaster, How Artists Survive the Music Business to Become the Legends We Love, which is based on the podcast.
Oh, I can't wait. And a special shout out to your artist. I've told you this before. I love your artwork. Those sketches, for the covers of Song Sommelier. I just thought those are just so fresh and so clever. I really like those a lot.
Yeah, we're keeping Mick on. He's the resident artist and always will be, as long as he wants to be. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed that as well. It's so much fun to be working on a new show and to get mix art, on my phone with the first time I see it, and I know when he's nailed it, and it's beautiful. Yeah. So thanks for your support, Jay. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's such great stuff. Well, let's have you on again. Keep me posted on the new book. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy day. Body of work. Great job. Kudos.
Yeah, thank you. If it encourages people to listen to more albums, queue up more listening sessions, or read more about the format, it's done its job. And that's why I did it.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Jay. See you soon.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.